Will they stay or will they go? A momentous day for the Jacksons on BBC One in just a mo. Meanwhile, BBC Two finds that they're not posh or sporty, but that the Spice Islands are scary. Join Ray Mears on his travels in half an hour.
Now on to the first in a new series of Southern Eye.
Here's Carsley, and still Carsley. Yes!
It's been another tough year for the Saints. Again, it's a battle to stay in the Premiership.
Oh, they can't quite believe it. Southampton being torn apart now.
I think this is a season that we're going to be found out. We will be relegated, we will lose our ground, and if we're not careful, it can just go and spiral from there.
Should Saints still be struggling? 9 months ago came a deal that was supposed to transform the club. But though it was a bonanza for shareholders, so far it seems to have brought little new money to Saints. This is the story of how that controversial deal was made. It involves an exotic location and some of the biggest names in the city. All the old Saints directors declined to take part in the programme. They say decisions were taken in the best interests of the club in the privacy of the boardroom. Tonight, Southern Eye goes into the boardroom and asks who benefited most. Our national game is now big business. Clubs need huge amounts of money to compete in the Premiership. Many have turned to the stock market to raise cash. Some flotations have been very successful. Manchester United plc is now, financially at least, the biggest football club in the world. But is a flotation always in the best interests of a club?
Stock market flotations are part of modern football. They can give supporters an opportunity to buy shares in the club they love. They can be a means of bringing fresh money into the club necessary for the kind of transfer fees and salary levels that are part of today's football. Equally, though, they can just be a way of enriching the existing board of directors to no benefit to the club at all. And I think you can't generalise. You've got to look at the merits of each case.
In Southampton's case, the club floated on the stock exchange by merging with a public company. It was a deal put together by a handful of city figures and club directors and was to prove a huge money spinner. Overnight, Southampton's shares soared in value from 52,000 to 24 million. But most of that went into the pockets of shareholders. In the first fortnight of trading, 10 million shares changed hands, bringing in £14 million for the lucky sellers. For the club itself, the deal wasn't so rewarding. It was to bring in just £6 million. So why did Saints choose this deal? During the 90s, the club was run by a close-knit group of local professional men. Guy Ascombe and Mike Richards are both accountants. Keith Wiseman and Ian Gordon are solicitors, and Brian Hunt is a builder. Over the years, these men all bought up shares in the club at little cost to themselves. By October last year, they owned over a quarter of a Premiership club. It had cost them little more than £14,000, just £1 a share. Shares had been valued at £1 ever since the Saints first rolled out under the club name in 1897. But though £1 may have been a fair price then, they were clearly worth much more a century later. Anybody who could get hold of shares at that price got a bargain, and it was often the directors who snapped up the bargains. They say they were doing it in the best interests of the club to prevent a hostile takeover bid. But some of those who were turned away could hardly be described as hostile. The former club sponsor, Draper Tools, and the chairman of the present sponsors, Sanderson Electronics, both tried and failed to get shares. As for existing shareholders, some were unhappy about the way their shares ended up back in directors' hands. Basil Bowyer was a Saints player in the 1930s and a director for many years. He owned a significant chunk of the club, 2,500 shares. In the late 80s, he died, leaving his shares to his son. Now those shares have gone from the family forever. They were sold when Basil's son George was facing bankruptcy in 1991. Mr. Bowyer's assets had been put in the hands of an insolvency practitioner, and he decided to sell the shares. He rang the club to find out what they were worth and was told £1 each. A middleman then bought the shares and sold them on to the directors for the same bargain price.
I seriously believe that they knew that they were getting shares at a ludicrously cheap price. I do feel that the directors should stand up and say why they use an intermediary to buy my shares. I'd like those two matters explained.
Each of the 5 directors got 500 of Mr. Bowyer's shares. In total, they paid £2,500. Mr. Bowyer's old shares are today worth £600,000. The same directors acquired another chunk of shares in an equally controversial way, this time from a more mysterious source. From 1978 onwards, a company called Westwood was buying up Saints shares. Westwood was registered in the office of Guy Ascombe, one of the club's directors. Mr. Ascombe was also a director of Westwood, but he's always refused to say who Westwood was buying the shares for. In an interview with the BBC in February, it became no clearer.
I can't tell you because I'm not authorised to do so. They are a nominee company just the same as Lloyds Bank or anybody else.
But you do have close links with them. They are part of your office structure, aren't they?
No, I actually share an office with the firm who Westwood nominees are in the same office block. That is absolutely true.
And you don't know anything about them, or are you not prepared to discuss?
I'm not prepared to talk about their affairs.
In all, Westwood bought 4,000 Saints shares. Most were eventually sold to the directors for £1 each. The last batch went to directors and club officials last September. This time, a 6th board member, Laurie McMenemy, also benefited. The value of the shares increased 500-fold when Saints floated on the stock exchange just 4 months later. October the 26th last year, one of the high points of the season. Saints beat mighty Man United 6-3, and the fans were delighted. The directors were pleased too, but not just with the result of the game. They'd just had a good result in the boardroom. They decided to take on a partner. Their choice was Secure Retirement plc, a small Bristol-based property company which ran homes for the elderly. The two sides met on October the 9th, and 9 weeks later a deal was announced, a merger and flotation on the stock exchange. It was a bonanza for Saints shareholders. Every one old Saints share was exchanged for 320 shares in the new company. The Saints directors were big winners, among them Chairman Guy Ascombe. His 3,500 shares were converted into over 1 million new ones. And FA Chairman Keith Wiseman's holding was increased to more than 800,000. On the Secure side, the number of shares remained the same, but their value trebled on the first day of trading. Secure directors Rupert Lowe and Andrew Cowan were among the winners. For the directors on both sides, these are paper profits, as they haven't sold any shares, and their price has since fallen. It was a controversial deal with supporters.
Read all about the shares shenanigans. Take a leaflet.
Some fans felt it had all been done in secrecy and were angry at the profits of those who'd made so much from so little investment. It also caused resentment in the dressing room when manager Graham Souness broke the news to the Saints players. One player spoke to us but didn't want to be identified. His words are read by an actor.
He said, "You'll be pleased to know that the club's been floated on the stock market today." One or two other lads started asking him if there'll be a chance for us to buy shares, but he said he knew nothing about it. He seemed as unhappy about it as us. The lads just couldn't believe it. 95% of them would have put their own money in. We didn't expect something for nothing, but we did expect to be given the same chance as the other board members were.
The controversy went wider. David Mellor, a former cabinet minister, is now in charge of bringing new supervision to the game. He says rumours about the Saints flotation are part of the reason why the government set up his football task force.
Rather, as the Bible says, by their deeds shall ye know them. I mean, I think the question that Southampton fans have got to ask is, well, I mean, has this flotation been good for the club? As we speak, it's hard to see that much has happened. It doesn't seem to have brought any new money into the club. It does seem, though, to have greatly improved at least the potential wealth of a number of the non-executive directors who subscribe to it, with some of them for a few £1,000s investment in shares in the old club, appear now to, on paper at least, be worth up to around £1 million. Well, that's quite a nice payday for them. What has it done for the club?
Guy Ascombe wouldn't be interviewed for this programme, but he spoke to the BBC when the controversy first broke.
I would point out that I can't sell the shares for a period of up to 6 years, and therefore it's a long time away before I can ever take
But still, I mean, it's still worth a lot when you finally do. You've got to admit, a lot more than you put in.
Yes, it is, and there's no way of denying that, and I would not deny it. It's not what I wanted to achieve. What we're trying to achieve is taking this club forward.
What many fans couldn't understand was why a Premiership football club chose an obscure property company to take it forward. How did they come together? As Southern Eye discovers, the answer lies 4,000 miles away. Life at Key in the Bahamas is one of the world's most exclusive communities. Here, the rich and famous live in tight security. Only accredited people are allowed in. Here also lives a man who makes deals. Michael Withers is a lifelong fan of Saints, born just yards from the club. He also knows Saints chairman Mr. Ascombe. For some time he'd been looking for an investor for the club, and last year the search began in earnest. First, Mr. Withers tried a neighbour at Life at Key, the reclusive Joseph Lewis, who's also Britain's richest man. But Mr. Lewis wasn't interested, and later invested in Glasgow Rangers instead. The secure connection was to come via another middleman back home, Jim Slater. Mr. Slater's name made headlines in the 70s when his investment company Slater Walker crashed, causing a city scandal. He told the BBC at the time he was deeply in debt.
Can I ask you to what tune you are in debt?
Well, I will tell you, but I can approximate it. I would say I'm just under a minus millionaire. In other words, I'm almost £1 million in debt.
Mr. Slater has now paid off those debts and still has city connections. Last spring, he was asked by Secure Retirement to find them a new line of business. Mr. Withers continues the story.
I came across Secure in London when I was talking to a great friend of mine for 35 years, Jim Slater, and he knew Rupert Lowe and knew Secure Retirement, and that's how my first introduction came about. And the first meeting ever that took place was on October the 9th in London.
And what happened then?
At that meeting was the first of many meetings that were to take place. I wasn't present later, obviously, at the meetings of the board and Southampton Football Club, but I thought at that time what a very good deal it was for Southampton Football Club.
The deal had come about as a result of introductions made by two middlemen. For Mr. Withers, the prize was a large fee, 150,000 shares. Jim Slater won't say if he got a fee, but he bought his own shares in Secure. The last of these he acquired quite legally on October the 11th, 2 days after the first meeting between Saints and Secure, which he did not attend. Mr. Slater wouldn't be interviewed on camera, but did tell us he stopped buying shares as soon as he heard there was a definite prospect of some kind of deal being consummated. He sold his shares on the day the club was floated and made around £40,000 profit. Both middlemen had played a crucial role, yet in the documentation only Mr. Withers' name and fee appeared. The more famous name, Jim Slater, wasn't mentioned. Indeed, Mr. Withers originally said that his old friend Jim Slater had nothing to do with the deal. Whatever the profits of the middlemen, the Saints directors always argued the deal was in the best interests of the club, as it brought cash, a stock market listing, and the property and management expertise vital to build a new stadium. They also point out it was approved by independent advisors. The first was football lawyer Barry Gold. He vetted potential bidders and, coincidentally, used to own shares in Secure Retirement. The other advisor is Gerald Reingold, the head of merchant bankers Dorney Day. His company helped draw up the document advising shareholders of the possible merger. The document states that none of the club's advisors has any interest, directly or indirectly, in Saints or Secure shares. Yet Southern Eye has discovered that Mr. Reingold owned over 7,000 shares in Secure while he was advising Southampton. This wasn't mentioned in the shareholders' document, and 3 days after the club was floated, he sold 6,000 of his shares at a substantial profit. In a letter to the BBC, Dorney Day said that Mr. Reingold had told both sets of directors in writing of his share ownership. But the company couldn't provide the BBC with that letter as it contained other confidential information. They pointed out Mr. Reingold was advising the board and not the shareholders. As for the shareholders' document, they said, small holdings by a director of an advisor to the board are not required to be disclosed. Legally, they're correct, but some shareholders who received the document believe that morally the shares should have been declared.
It is absolutely important that professional advisors disclose any interest that they have in either company, because if he has, as he did have, shares in Secure, then it was in his interest to make sure that the deal went through with Southampton, because almost certainly the shares were going to go up in value many times, which is in fact what happened, and then 5 minutes later he sells those shares at a very substantial profit.
Nevertheless, all those involved in the deal still stand by their view that what it brought to Southampton was in the best interests of the club.
I think this was at that time the best deal for the club, having considered many other deals, but the decision was not mine. The decision is solely of the chairman and the board of Southampton Football Club who made the decision. It was a known fact that the club needed an injection of cash, but unfortunately we do not have a Jack Walker in Southampton. If there had been one, I'm quite sure we'd have found that person by now, because everyone knew the club desperately needed cash and still does need cash.
Although the Saints couldn't find a rich fan like Jack Walker, the millionaire who invested his steel fortune in Blackburn Rovers, there were other potential sources of finance available. Instead of merging with Secure, then floating, the Saints could have raised money by going to the stock market alone. And Southern Eye has also discovered that the board were approached by other wealthy investors in the weeks before the Secure deal. But the directors decided these alternatives were not in the best interests of the club. The first offer came from a group of Israeli businessmen who were introduced to the club by manager Graham Souness. The Israelis claimed they were prepared to invest £15 million, but they wanted a controlling interest. A week later, Saints representative Mike Withers met Rupert Lowe of Secure Retirement. Just 5 days later, multimillionaire and passionate Chelsea supporter Matthew Harding offered to help finance Saints' new stadium. There were now 3 interested parties. But Saints pursued Secure, and just 9 days after their first meeting, they'd decided that was the deal for them. Just weeks later, there was another potential investor. Lifelong Saints supporter Sir David Frost made 2 offers, but Mr. Askham says the first was too little, less than Secure had offered, and the second was too late. As for the Israelis, Mr. Askham says he was never told about the £15 million. And Mr. Harding's offer died with him in a helicopter crash in late October. The club has always maintained Secure was the right deal, but some former shareholders believe the club missed the simplest and best way of raising money. It should have gone it alone and floated as Southampton Football Club.
Then it should have issued new shares to the value of about, bring in, say, 30 or 40 million pounds in cash. Half that cash could have been used to strengthening the football club and making sure it stayed in the Premier League while we're building a stadium, and half of it could have been used as a very considerable deposit towards getting on with the new stadium.
To date, 5 Premiership clubs have floated on the stock exchange by themselves, but the Saints board say that route would have cost them too much and taken too long. The club's advisors, Dorney Day, offered another possible explanation. In a statement to the BBC, they said there could be damage to shareholders' interests by issuing an unnecessarily high number of shares and raising too much. What they mean is that issuing millions of new shares would dilute the holdings of existing shareholders. Their shares would be worth less. But was this decision in the best interest of the club? Few fans would accept that you could ever raise too much money for new players. They care about what happens on the pitch rather than what goes on in the boardroom. This season the club's been doing badly, losing 7 out of 10 Premiership games.
Up the Saints. What a load of rubbish.
Ron Broomfield has been supporting the club for 60 years. Even now he goes to every home match with his grandson.
It's 140 change. Thank you very much. So, come on then, predict.
1-1.
1-1. Ooh, a bit conservative.
He's seen a lot of ups and downs in the club's fortunes, but now he's worried.
Taking this side, I thought we would have had a better team than what we got. They're not even a first division team in my mind. Something's got to drastic happen. All this money, millions of pounds, they're going to pay for this new ground. First of all, they've got to get a football team to, accommodate the ground. To stay in this division. This is the only division where the money is.
The club desperately needs somebody to put in some real money. How can you have a Premiership club when their record signing is £1.3 million? There are loads of clubs in the First Division with larger wage bills than this club. They get smaller crowds, less TV money, so how come they can afford it? It's an embarrassing situation for a Premiership club.
Secure did bring money with it, a total of £6 million. Some has been used to pay off debts, but how much has gone on players? According to Graham Souness, the former manager, not a lot. In May, he and Laurie McMenemy quit the club, complaining about a spending limit of £2 million. He spoke to BBC South at the time.
I didn't fancy another 3 or 4 years just hanging on to our status as a Premier League team. If they're going to give me £2 million between now and the end of my contract, which is another 2 years, I can't guarantee anything in football, but what I could guarantee is that you'd be struggling in the Premier League.
We didn't set a definitive spending limit on Graham Souness at our meeting on Tuesday. That is not true. It was a discussion with regard to how we took the club forward.
It's still not clear who's right, but a document drawn up by stockbrokers acting for the club appears to confirm the cash restraints. It was sent to City investors the month before Mr Souness's walkout and suggests there was a spending limit of even less, just £1 million. Certainly Saints' recent transfer record is not impressive by Premiership standards. The club's net spending on players in the 9 months since the deal has been just £750,000. In the 9 months before the deal, Saints spent almost twice that amount. The row about spending highlights a conflict at the very heart of the marriage between football and finance. Businessmen tend to like to reduce costs, fans and managers like to spend. The conflict is putting former Secure director Rupert Lowe, now the chairman of the new company Southampton Leisure plc, under increasing pressure. He's faced booing and chants of "sack the board." Mr Lowe recently told BBC South fans should keep faith, as he's doing everything to make the new stadium happen. He also says money is available for his manager, but he can't say how much for commercial reasons.
We are investing in players. If you read the statement that we're sending out to shareholders today, we've made it quite clear that we will invest whatever we have, and we'll make available whatever we can to David Jones to augment his football team. But going and wheeling your trolley through the sweet shop, piling on everything that you see at first sight is not the right way to do it. And David has players who he's identified and is identifying as he gets to see what his team can do. And if we can afford to buy them, we will do.
But fans like Lynn Hoare, who's been going to Saints matches since she was a child, are getting impatient. They want the club to start spending more now.
Well, financial package he's brought with him is a joke, really. What's been happening, what players are we getting? We're selling all the time and replacing with second rate. It's not good enough. No longer, we can't afford it, you know, it's too expensive. This is the real world now, and we have to move on. And if we want to move on in the football world, then we have to compete. Are you getting on them? We're used to putting up with quite a lot. We're pretty loyal. I think we have to be. You wouldn't be supporting Southampton and put up with the things that are happening if you didn't really love the club. But each season now, it's just getting worse and harder to take, really.
Fans and businessmen do agree on one thing: a new stadium is crucial to Saints' future. The club want to build one at Stoneham on the outskirts of Southampton, but it's still a long way from finding the £50 million it needs. It's bidding for £10 million from the lottery. Much of the rest will have to come from the stock market. While the club is struggling to find money, some of Southampton Leisure plc's shareholders are very wealthy people. One is City investor Tony Dye, who controls a £58 billion pension fund and has a personal investment in Southampton of 500,000 shares. Another is Daniel Levy. He's the investment manager for the richest man in Britain, the same man originally approached by Mr. Withers in the Bahamas. Mr. Levy has sold almost 500,000 shares since the flotation, but remains a Saints shareholder. And there are rumours of wealthy outsiders who are waiting to move into the boardroom. Sir David Frost is thought to be still considering a takeover bid. Another name that's been mentioned is media tycoon Lord Hollick, who was born and bred in Southampton. This talk of takeovers appears to be more than just idle speculation. A document prepared by the club's stockbrokers suggests that if the company's share price doesn't improve, a takeover by a media or building company is likely. Some fans believe a takeover would be in the best interests of the club. Lynn Hoare reads the share prices every day. She can't bear to see the team lose, but knows that bad results lower the share price, and that makes a takeover bid more likely. Fans have always loved the Saints. Their devotion has been the one constant over the past 100 years. But football has left its amateur roots far behind. Saints have entered the jungle of high finance, where profits matter as much as points. In the 1990s, the best interests of the club are harder to define.
There are plenty of people who support football clubs for whom the success or failure of that football club is probably one of the 3 or 4 most important things in their lives. It gives a purpose to their life. And the question for football is, in becoming a big business, is it going to lose its soul? And the job of people doing the sort of job that I'm doing with the task force is to try and make sure football does not lose its soul.
I think it needs someone that is a fan to be involved at the boardroom, to get that passion back in, because that's what we need and that's what the Saints fans really deserve.
I am a fan as well, so I would like to see the team do well. But at the end of the day, I don't have my football boots on down there kicking the ball about. The players are there to play football, the manager's there to manage the team, and I'm there to ensure the club is run in an efficient way in both the interests of the supporters, the shareholders, and everybody else.
In the last few days, Southern Eye has learned that David Mellor's football task force plans to visit Southampton around the end of the year.
Okay, Arden, Team EF language, led the Whitbread fleet out of the Solent. Now an emphatic win in leg 1 of the 1997 Whitbread Round the World race for the Volvo